Welcome, Ingrid.
My gosh, Monique, I feel like I can now publish this book, Fawning, because I'm having a conversation with you. It's going to make me so emotional just thinking about it.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to elaborate, please.
Yes. So I guess maybe you didn't know this, but you were the very first podcast that I ever went on and told my story, not just from a clinical psychologist's perspective, but as a survivor. And I had been, on social media and doing sort of content on complex trauma generally. And I've been writing my memoir for a few years before we connected, but you invited me on the podcast and I was shaking in my boots and I said, here we go. And we didn't have a plan. It was just, let's create space for whatever needs to emerge. And this is what makes me emotional. So many of us in healing from complex trauma, which is relational trauma, is finding safe relationships and safe spaces where we can be this present to our prior wounding. And there was something transformative about being all of me, right? As a therapist unpacking all of these historical things that had happened, doing it on a podcast of all places, it truly changed my life. It connected me to myself in ways that I'm so grateful to you for. And then we followed up and we did another podcast when my memoir came out. And so now here we are now. It truly feels like my process is not complete until I connect with you specifically. So thank you for all you do on the podcast, but really for holding this space for me yet again. It's so powerful.
Thank you so much. I was honored to talk to you the very first time. I feel when somebody is sharing their story, it is probably like it was for you, like the first time to really share it and someone being present, but not just present, but connected to it. Because
Yes.
isn't that a part of our story where
That's
nobody was connected to it? They looked the other way or they had blocked ears or whatever it was. So it was an honor to hear your story. I felt it and just the wisdom that you have. I'm excited to talk about now your third book. I'm just going to show everybody the book. So it's called Fawning. I used to think that the nervous system would just go into these sort of set the fight, flight, and freeze. And then all of a sudden I started to hear fawn, fawn, fawn. So we can just unpack that. This is unplanned, just like the first time. It's like we're having coffee together,
love
like
it.
two friends, and the audience is joining us. I think I want to talk about why now, after you shared your story, which was incredible, why did you feel like you now wanted to write a whole book about fawning, this nervous system response fawning?
Well, this project sort of similar to the memoir, actually. It wasn't something I set out to do. It was something that came for me. And I think what is lovely about this is that not everyone's healing process is going to involve writing a book. But I do believe what happens is that these nudges, these callings that we have in our life are the path to personal healing. And so, just as the memoir came out of the blue, and I quite frankly thought there's no other book after that one, I was thrilled with it and so happy to have the community that it created. But long story short is that there was a hiccup at Amazon because I self published my memoir, and the memoir was pulled from the shelves, so to speak. And it was devastating after fighting so long to reclaim my story internally and then to share it, to have it unavailable was maddening. And so I reached out to Jan Bommer at Folio Lit, who I had been in touch with for years, but we had never worked together. And I was just like, Jan, I need to get my memoir back. And she was so lovely and so helpful. And in that process, she shared my memoir with a friend and colleague of hers. And the next thing you know, I'm meeting with these two top agents in New York on a Zoom screen similar to this one. And they said, Ingrid, we don't know what we can do about the memoir, but big publishing wants a book on the fawn response, and we think you're the one to write it, right? Because as you know, I had talked about fawn. And my whole body, Monique, I can't even tell you, it was like I knew 100% without a doubt I had to write that book. That, in fact, my whole life, including 5 years of writing the memoir, like I couldn't have done the fawning book without writing the memoir first, but I knew that this was the next extension of my own healing and my own learning, quite frankly. It's sort of like through the writing and the teasing apart these concepts and really drilling down on the page, it has been such an important part of my own learning process. And so I just immediately said yes, and we were off to the races. And unlike the memoir, which is just personal experience, this book was really an expansion of some of these concepts. And that meant I turned to my practice. And in fact, I have 7 clients who have shared the full breadth and depth of their personal experience. And these aren't sort of composite characters that I think people often use in self help books. It's really teaching through lived experience, right? So it's my story and it's 7 of my clients, and then gathering what we know from the field. To your point, right? We've always known of fight, flight, and freeze, but fawn has gone missing. And so I'm kind of mining this burgeoning information and trying to compile it in one place to create the fullest picture of the fawn response that we currently have. And it's a contribution to an ongoing conversation, one that needs to be had. But I'm so honestly proud of this book and the tone of it. I feel like it's been just a gift and an honor to write it, and I can't wait for people to read it.
When you said, you felt it in your whole body, 100%, this is what I need to do. How many of us wish we had that? This is what I need to do.
Yeah.
I want you to tell the audience, why do you think that
Yeah.
this, obviously it's very connected to you and your story, but
Yes.
why is this so important?
Because as a clinical psychologist and even a trauma therapist, I hadn't heard about the fawn response either until years into writing my memoir. We now know Pete Walker coined the term maybe 10 or 12 years ago now, and he is a therapist who works with complex trauma. And he has this amazing, it almost feels like this underground sort of cult like following, but it's not like that work was permeating into my ongoing trainings. And so learning about what we've long called either people pleasing or codependency and making these terms trauma informed, really extending them both into the nervous system, what's happening physiologically as a quite frankly genius adaptation, and extending the definition outside of the realm of just a personal problem. Well, come on, Ingrid, just raise your self esteem and set some healthy boundaries, right? It's like, no, 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 no. I come to these behaviors quite honestly. In fact, they were life saving. They allowed me to survive the environments that I was living in, quite frankly, dysfunctional, ongoing environments. And with that context, it's like, honestly, my entire life finally made sense to myself. I made sense to myself in a way that didn't inspire so much shame. Um, I talk about it too, like, why this? Because this was the last house on the block, and it was the one that finally, like I said, made everything else make sense. And so, similar to my memoir on complex trauma, if I was a therapist who had complex trauma and didn't know it, how many people are walking around not understanding the origins of their ongoing issues? I feel like that about the fawn response. It's like, I'm so tired of shaming and pathologizing and stigmatizing people. It's not helpful. So we got to turn this thing on its head and say, wait a second. At least that's my hope. Fawning comes on board when the fight flight response is either totally unavailable or would make things worse. And we can't keep looking at people like, well, why aren't you just being assertive and having a voice? It's like, well, because a lot of us have an experience similar to mine, which is that when I tried, I was annihilated.
Yes.
And the body remembers, right? So I just absolutely love this trauma informed lens and how it opens up other conversations like financial fawning and sexual fawning and all of these things that I also feel haven't received a lot of airtime. But most people, when I talk about it, they go, I know what you're talking about. And yeah, that's the why. That's the why.
I mean, that is the whole thing with complex trauma and the freedom that happens when we start to understand that our responses
Yes.
make sense. And so that shame and blame and character picking,
Right.
it doesn't work anymore, and people need to be informed that it goes so much deeper. It's biological, it's physiological.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and it was designed for our protection, like, it's not something's gone wrong, and maybe we can even talk about now, what is fawning?
Well, it's sometimes called the please and appease response. And so essentially, it's appeasement or it's even caretaking of another in order to get your relational needs met. And it can look really different depending on the context. And so the way that I describe that in Fawning is with my stepdad, who was the aggressor, right? He was coming for me, and my body knew that I was not safe. Presented more like a pleasing. It could even look like flirting and flattering. And it's like this, hey, remember that I'm a person. And I did not like him, but I needed him to like me. That it sort of presented in that way. But on the other hand, with my mom, who I needed her help, and she was absent, right? She was, quite frankly, in a chronic fawn response herself and not. So it looked like I was almost endowing her with my own level of functioning, waiting, helping, hoping, like wanting to bring her online in a way. This presents more like that caretaking side of things. But you can see in both, on both sides, it's like I'm managing this relational gap. I'm like metabolizing the entire system through my body
Yeah.
in the hope that if I can manage them, I will stay safe enough.
You pinpointed it. That is what we do. I think all of us with histories of trauma, for our survival purposes, we know that we are supposed to connect with them for our well-being, for our safety. And so we will do whatever it takes to get on board to ensure our safety. And so, I mean, I'm just thinking somebody who may have an alcoholic father that's chaotic, they may start to go into the fawning to kind of quiet him down or say things that will keep themselves safe. So that's just a natural, I mean, it makes so much sense, form of fawning.
Yes, right. We're very hyper vigilant. We can sense people's moods a mile away. We know how to manage like what's happening externally. We can either get bigger in terms of a performance, we can get really small, don't want to ruffle any feathers, right? So there's this shape shifting sort of quality. It's less about who am I and more about who do I need to be. These are some of the signs. And although the fawn response is hardwired, to your point, we are relational beings. We are reliant on our caregivers for longer than any other species. We are not meant to live 24/7 in a chronic trauma response. And for many who leaned on the fawn response, it became almost like it's our personality. It's like we almost actually believe, not almost, we believe we're just being patient and empathic and kind. And we are these things, but we don't know the extent to which these assets are being hijacked, right, by our trauma response, where we don't get to exist without these things in the driver's seat. We don't understand the extent to which there's a self abandonment that's happening in order to show up for the other is. And so this is the piece where we go, wait a second, I've gone missing in my own life. And that's the heartbreak. It's the heartbreak and it's the hope of what I'm calling unfawning, which is this return to self, or quite frankly, for a lot of us, it's building this relationship with self that we've never had before. It's flipping this external focus and managing moods and states externally, right? Where our entire sense of internal safety has been reliant on external safety or validation or permission. And it's turning that focus inward and building it internally, like I said, maybe for the first time. And then, and only then, do some of these other things become possible in terms of having a voice and setting boundaries. It's because we have access to ourselves. But trying to do those things first often only perpetuates a trauma reenactment where we get burned and we go, see what happens. I can't set a boundary. I can't have a voice. And this is the cycle that I'm hoping to help people get out of. The one that says, it must just be me and I'm broken and this isn't possible. These things weren't possible because you weren't given all of the tools. You were told that these were behavioral problems and given behavioral solutions that never tapped into what was actually happening in your body. Yeah, that's the crux of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. So right. I remember even in your story, you were blamed, like there was something wrong with you.
Yes.
And many of us, I mean, I was told I was selfish
Yes.
as a child when my needs were completely, ignored. But I grew up believing I was
Me
because
too.
that's what happens. Yeah. With
Yeah.
the wiring. So my question is, so what is when someone's, let's say, starts to recognize, oh my gosh, I've been so focused on making sure everyone's okay. And I haven't focused on myself. I don't even feel like I developed a self. What is the very first step? I know I would think it's recognizing it, but then what?
Yeah. Well, to your point, it's usually recognizing it in hindsight. Don't expect that suddenly you're going to go into the world and notice your fawn response happening in the moment because it's probably not going to happen. But in terms of building that internal safety, we have to slow down. I probably did this with you before, but one of my favorite things is literally putting my hand on my own heart. It's this like stance of self-compassion and it invites this sense of witnessing like who am I? What am I noticing right now? And in every trauma training I've ever attended, we are instructed to use the language of what are you noticing right now? Or what are you experiencing? Even what are you feeling? It's this curiosity that's tuning into the body, not what do you think about that? Or what's your opinion? Or what do you think you should do? Most of us are oriented back to the head, to this cognitive process. And for a lot of us, it keeps us stuck. So just bringing your noticing into the body, even if all you notice is, I don't have any sense of connection to myself, or I feel numb, or I feel shame. This is where it's some of the hardest work, but it's where so much magic can happen is that when we tune in, and we notice whatever is there. Even if what we notice is, I'm just judging myself, I'm doing it wrong. I encourage people to attempt to stay there because what we want to do is flee again and go, see, I'm a loser, I'm doing it wrong, I don't have any sense of connection. And actually, when we can stay with ourselves, even in that discomfort, oh my gosh, boy, does it move the needle towards our capacity to be able to ultimately discern, not only within ourselves, but in the world, is this discomfort or is this danger? So, without growing this capacity, even just to be present to ourselves with, like I said, what feels like discomfort, we are not able out in the world to really discern. The body will go towards danger every time because that's our history. So it's this curiosity. Within that curiosity, it's being curious about what's a regulated nervous system? Where do I have more flexibility and access to myself? And practicing and playing with things like maybe it's a weighted blanket or scented candles or orienting to the environment with your senses. I give a whole host of different things that I do, that all my clients do, but we start finding out where's the connective tissue that allows me to feel even more grounded and more connected to myself. And one tool is going to work really well for one person, and someone else is going to go, meh, like, I don't really like that. It didn't do anything for me. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. We go, okay, thanks for trying. I wonder if you feel called to try something else. I wonder if you can think of a time in your life when you did feel connected to yourself. What were you doing then? Or can you even imagine it now? Right. So it's growing this new sense of connection to self in all of these different ways.
Yeah. And when we do that, it helps us to feel the feeling of being like actually in this moment and present, which is something that's very difficult for those of us who being present was intolerable.
Intolerable. And it can just be for a moment. You can dip your toes in, and that's enough. That's a beautiful beginning, right? And just as we started this podcast today of me saying how transformative it was for you to hear my story, this is where we start to be in relationship with ourselves, bringing that same interest and presence. It's this reparenting piece where we become the compassionate witness that we needed and likely never got. And I'll tell you, for a long time, Monique, I felt like, well, that's like a consolation prize if I've ever heard of one. It just felt so insufficient and almost cheesy. I was like, inner child work? What are you talking about? But now I know, call it whatever you want to call it. This new relationship to self is the most powerful and important of our lives. I really truly hope that all of us create new community or renegotiate old relationships so that they can hold more of who we are now. But the truth is, this relationship to self is the one that can move mountains. It's powerful.
I wanna ask you more about that. That is huge, and yet it can feel so strange to so many people.
Yes, I feel like to me, it's the greatest gift of this work, which I think translates to self trust. So when I said that I met with these agents and they said there's a book on the fawn response. What had been happening prior to that in my life was that my memoir, this self published memoir, just me and Instagram and Amazon, had done really well. And people were like, what are you going to do next? Are you going to start a community? Are you going to do? And I just, every time I was like, no, no, that doesn't feel right. My body knew that it was a no for me, right? Because I had come far enough along to just immediately recognize what that feeling feels like in my belly and how I just came to trust it completely. So that when I had this meeting with them and they said, there's this potential opportunity and my body just leaned in 100%. It's like, this is the self trust I've been longing for my whole life. And I was saying to someone else recently, a part of my history too is addiction. And I've been sober now for, it's going to be 30 years in a couple of weeks, which is like, it just basically means I'm old, but it's also a really long time. And it's been foundational to a lot of my other work. But I feel like what I have now, this ability to access myself and trust myself and honor these nudges and take care of myself when things don't go the way that I wish that they would. And I'm sitting in the pain and I can hold space for that too. It's kind of what I was seeking in drugs and alcohol and I never found, right? That level of magic and profound connection and being so alive essentially is what I now have in my waking life. I mean, that's kind of incredible when you think about it.
And even using the fawn response, as you were speaking, I was thinking, so many of us have, because the word you used was self-trust, so many of us feel like they've been betrayed by their bodies, their physiology. They can't have self-trust because if they let go, it'll turn into a big panic attack or, it'll just numb out or it'll disconnect. And so this idea of coming back and actually developing self-trust, it sounds huge, and it's what we want for our children,
That's
when
right.
right?
That's right. There's this saying, I don't know who said it, but I reference it a lot for parenting that, children can't learn to regulate emotions they're not allowed to have. And so a lot of our reparenting then is creating that same space. Like I said, for us to even feel the judgment or the shame or the terror, this is how we start to learn to regulate ourselves in the face of those things. And as we're creating that space, oh, I can hold the space for that maybe horrible feeling. We're creating space in equal and opposite directions towards joy and creativity. It's like you widen in both directions. And that's why we do this work. It's not just so that we can feel the pain and the terror. I would never want to live there. It's really about this agency and autonomy that I never had before.
That's huge.
Yeah. One thing that you said, it made me think about, we kind of feel like our bodies betrayed us or that we
Yes.
couldn't trust ourselves. And I think a couple of key things, even in my own experience. One being just repetitive dysfunctional relationships. I felt like I couldn't have a healthy romantic relationship to save my life. And that idea that, like, I have a broken picker and there's something wrong with me. And the other side of that was the sexual fawning piece, which was sexual experience was so tied to fawning. And I think if we zoom out on that and you look at listen, fawning occurs within hierarchies, within systems of power. It's not just family of origin or romantic partners. Think about patriarchy, racism, all marginalized communities. The body knows where it resides in the pecking order and how much power it has and what it has to do to sort of go along to get along and be as unscathed as possible. So for many women in particular, and fawning is not a gendered response. I have two male clients in the book, for example, but for many women who we know in this patriarchal system that we are disempowered, and yet we are seen for how attractive we are, how sexual we are. There is a sense that that is where our power lies. And so when you're being pursued and the body goes, I'm going to flirt here, I'm going to be more sexy, I'm going to be more attractive in order to stay safe, that can feel deeply confusing and shameful to a person. And long before I even understood what the fawn response was, I was writing about these ideas. I think I maybe even said to you, I certainly said in the memoir, I felt like I was prostituting myself for my stepfather's benefit. As a young child, as
Mm.
a teenager, that's what it felt like. And that feeling continued in so many countless relationships after that. So, talk about feeling like I can't trust myself. I put myself in really risky situations that made me feel awful, where I felt used, and a part of me knew that I was playing into that. Understanding fawning allows me to know that I did actually have strings, almost like Pinocchio. And I was waiting to be made like a real live person for the strings to be cut once and for all. So, the origins of those behaviors were not about me and my inherent whole self operating from a place of capacity. I was absolutely operating from a place of I still had the strings on my body. And that is not because I couldn't be trusted or don't have the capacity. These are some of the things we get to move out of and really go, what does authentic relationship, reciprocal, healthy relationship look and feel like? What does it look and feel like to have ownership over my own body? I'll tell you, even letting my hair go gray and saying I'm not going to do Botox, like no shame towards anybody that does, but there's a part of me for my own self that coming out of a chronic fawn response is I'm not going to do anything in order to look a certain way for anybody else. If it pleased me, if I wanted to do it, great. If it doesn't, it's a no for me, right? I'm not going to continue all of these grooming behaviors, even because I did a lot of that in the service of trying to stay a little bit safer in an unsafe world. And I don't want to perpetuate anything that makes me feel like I'm still beholden, right, to those old ideas.
I talk about inner child, but I can just see your younger part or younger child going,
Yes.
that's just yeah.
Yeah, we're going back, I think, to rescue a lot of these trapped parts over time. And for me anyway, I say it's ongoing. I think that's the other thing that felt really important to me about this book is saying, listen, I have these credentials, but I'm coming at this just from a human being's perspective. I think as clinicians, even, we have to recognize when people are coming to us as clients with complex trauma, the chances that they have their own fawn response is probably pretty high. Which means, and I've experienced this as a client too, our clients want to please us as clinicians. They want us to feel like we're doing a good job. They don't want to rupture this really important, vital relationship. And so we as clinicians might think, I am such a great therapist. This is going really well, not knowing that our client is like tucking everything under the rug because they still don't feel safe enough to share it. And so we need to, if fawning happens in hierarchy, we need to even the playing field to the extent that we can. And that means between clinician and client as well. It's also why I've never used the word patient. I don't believe that people are sick. I know, I don't have my clients call me Dr. Clayton. It's like, I'm Ingrid, you're my client. This is a very real relationship. It's why I've always included some level of self disclosure in my practice. Um, because I don't have the answers for somebody else. You're not coming to me for 50 minutes a week so I can tell you what to do and how to do it. Quite frankly, that's only perpetuating a fawn response. It's telling every client that I have the answers for you. And that's not the point. The point is to say, how can I help you with these tools so that you can mine your own wisdom? You can connect to this gold that lives within you. And quite frankly, I don't even know what that is or which process is going to be the one that helps to lead you there. It's a process of discovery for me as well. And I feel like so many self-help books and clinicians who market themselves in a certain way, they create this idea that there is 10 steps, that there is a finish line, and it continues to shame people because they work so earnestly to do those 10 steps and they work so earnestly to try to reach that finish line. And then they still fawn, for instance, and they go, see, I'm still broken. And that's why I'm like, no, I just literally wrote the book on fawning and I probably fawned within the last week. And that's not a sign that I'm broken or that I did it wrong. It's a sign that I have a body. That's it.
And that goes for all the responses,
That's
no
right.
matter how much work you've done, no matter how much therapy, or you've been in therapy for 10 years and you should have arrived. I know, I'll be honest, I thought the name of the podcast is the Healing Trauma Podcast. And I was on a mission because we've been through so much suffering and misunderstanding that I was going to find the answer and we
Yes.
were going to all live happily ever after.
Me too, girl. Believe me, you and I only come to this place because we've tried everything else. But it's restoring, again, it's just more sort of flexibility that we don't stay in the wound as long, right? We don't get maybe triggered as often or it doesn't take us as deep as it once did. But we're always going to have a body. And hopefully, I'm going to keep learning and changing and growing, which means I've never been in this place before. So that's going to inspire a whole set of new opportunities to be triggered and dysregulated and all the other things. So I just want to reduce that hierarchy, which I think encourages just a sense of this is just what it looks like to be a human being. And to your point, we've come through enough, right? Than to have this measuring stick of like, but how far along are you? And yeah, to pretend, right, that there's this finish line.
Sometimes I'll see people on Instagram or in other places where they kind of give the impression that they have arrived. They've learned this kind of technique or this kind of therapy. You do these things and your nervous system's going to be regulated most of the time. And that's it. And it's like,
Yeah. I have not met anyone who lives there in my real life, and I have never arrived there. Maybe it exists, and my hat's off to those people. But I think there's also something to be said for also, the depth of trauma. Like I'm now in my 50s. So I was literally living in a dysregulated, in a chronic trauma response for decades. The idea that there's any kind of a band aid that's going to fix that, it's kind of ludicrous.
I always remember when Dr. Pat Odgen was on here, she said something about these patterns that we learned them young, and patterns are hard to change. They're hard to change. And so when you realize it's a lot of it is instinctual,
Completely. Yeah, these aren't conscious things. They're coming
yes,
online without our opinions or our awareness.
exactly. And if we can at least notice and understand and then open up a little bit of compassion,
Yeah,
that's huge.
it's enormous. I
Yeah.
love that.
Well, I loved talking to you. I'm so happy for you and proud of you
Oh,
that
thank
this book is out. Is there any last words you'd like to say before we close?
I mean, the thing that is so meaningful to me that I really hope people take from this work is you make sense. You make sense. If you've been walking around like I did for so long, being like, I can't figure it out, and I've tried all the things, and I work so hard, and I still don't feel free, there are very good reasons for that. And you weren't given the full picture or all the information. And I'm not saying I have all of it, but I'm saying we know a lot more now, and we all deserve those tools and that
Yes.
information. And my hope is that when you have it, you will also know you make sense.
I couldn't say that any better. That is exactly right. Thank you so much, Ingrid. It was such a pleasure to
And
speak with you today.
you, Monique, again for everything.